You ever have one of those mornings where everything feels perfectly calm, right before life smacks you in the face with chaos? Yeah. This was one of those mornings. The sun was just sneaking up over the ridge, painting everything gold. That soft kind of light that makes even my messy yard look like something out of a country music video. Fog was lifting off the grass like the ground was sighing its way into the day. And in the middle of all that peace, the gentle clink 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 of my livestock bells. Not church bells. Not alarm bells. Just my babies, my goats, my mini cows, and the one chicken who thinks she's a Disney princess, all wearing these tiny decorative bells that jingled every time they moved. Real soft. More wind chime than wake the whole town. I stepped outside with my coffee, still half asleep, and watched them wander around like they owned the land. It was one of those mornings where the world feels quiet and alive at the same time. The kind of morning that makes you think, man, life is good. See, I live in what the HOA calls a semi-rural community, which is basically their way of saying, we want country vibes, but we also want to micromanage everything. So I get the land, the animals, the sunrise, the fresh air, but I also get the lovely HOA board, who act like the neighborhood is some sort of luxury resort. They send emails like they're running a military base. Meanwhile, my goats are out here chewing fence posts like snacks. Two different worlds. Anyway, as the sun warmed up the yard, my animals started moving more, and the bells jingled with them, soft, friendly, kinda wholesome. When you grow up around livestock, the sound of bells becomes something you don't just hear, you feel it. It's the sound of routine, of home, of yep, my animals are alive and doing their thing. So I'm standing there, sipping my coffee, thinking about how peaceful everything is, when my mini cow Daisy trots up to me. Her bell rings this little bink bink sound, like she's trying to tell me good morning. And honestly, it works. I scratch her head. She licks my sleeve. We have a moment. My neighbors? Well, most of them don't even notice the bells. They're softer than a phone vibrating under a couch cushion. Half the time, even I forget they're ringing. But this morning, as I watched the fog fade and the day really start, something in the air felt too calm. Like the world was holding its breath. I didn't know it yet, but those tiny bells, those sweet little sounds that make my mornings feel like a Hallmark movie, were about to cause a whole tornado of drama. A serious tornado. Before all that, though, life felt simple. I walked the yard, checking the fences and feeding my crew. My goats, by the way, all have personalities. One of them, Pickles, thinks he's the leader even though he's the smallest. His bell rings with this fast little tink 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 because he can't stand still for more than 2 seconds. Another one, Big Mo, walks slow but heavy, so his bell sounds like a grandpa settling into a porch chair. The chicken Princess Cluck has a tiny pink bell that matches her attitude. She only rings it when she wants attention, which is, always. These bells have been part of our routine forever. My animals like them. I like them. They help me keep track of who's wandering where. And if we're being honest, they're cute. Nothing wrong with cute livestock. But as I stood there that morning, soaking it all in, I remembered the HOA's last email, something vague about auditory disturbances. I laughed at it at the time. I mean, come on. My bells? Disturbances? The only thing disturbed in this neighborhood is the HOA president's soul. Still, I brushed it off. No way were they talking about me. No way would someone suddenly have a problem with bells that have been here longer than half the board members. But that's the thing about HOA drama, you never see it coming until it smacks you in the face with a fine tape to your door. And that peaceful sunrise? Turns out it was the calm before the storm. I finished my coffee, gave Daisy another head scratch, and listened to the little bells echo around the yard like they were blessing the start of my day. I had no clue that in just a few hours, those same gentle sounds would be the subject of a formal complaint. Or that the board would call them disruptive noisemakers. Or that one neighbor would claim, and I swear I'm not making this up, that the bells were ruining the spiritual harmony of the neighborhood. But that's all later. For now, it was just me, my animals, the sunrise. And the bells. The bells that had no idea they were about to start a full-blown war. I took one last look at the peaceful yard, completely clueless about the chaos heading my way. And as I walked back toward the house, I said the line that would soon come back to haunt me. But little did I know, those bells would soon spark the loudest HOA war my neighborhood had ever seen. If there's one thing you should know about my HOA, it's this: they love sending emails. They send emails about grass height, about trash cans, about improper holiday decor, which apparently includes my inflatable Christmas goat, but that's another story. So when I opened my inbox one random Tuesday morning and saw a subject line that said "Notice, Sound Disturbances," I didn't panic. I didn't even blink. I just sighed, took a sip of my coffee, and clicked it open like it was another coupon I wasn't gonna use. The email was vague. And I mean vague. It said something like, "A recent sound disturbance has been reported in your vicinity. Please be mindful of your activities to maintain the peaceful enjoyment of the community." Peaceful enjoyment. They love that phrase. They put it in bold like it's scripture. Now, I sat there staring at the screen, trying to figure out what sound disturbance they were talking about. My animals weren't loud. The bells weren't loud. I wasn't out here running a metal band in my backyard. The only thing that had made noise all week was Princess Cluck yelling at a butterfly, but I doubt the HOA categorized chicken emotional breakdowns as disturbances. So I closed the email. Didn't reply. Didn't stress. Didn't give it a second thought. Because honestly, nothing excessive was happening. I figured it was just the HOA doing their usual "we're watching you" routine. But then the neighbor gossip started. My street has this little ecosystem of information. One person sees something, and suddenly the whole neighborhood knows before the sun sets. By noon that same day, my phone buzzed with a message from my buddy Steve across the street. "Yo. You get that sound email? Heard it wasn't random." I texted back. "From who? And what sound? My goat's breathing?" He sends this long voice note, whispering like he's leaking government secrets, telling me the complaint almost definitely came from one person, Linda. Ah, yes. Linda. Every HOA has a Linda. If yours doesn't, you might be the Linda. Now, before I go any further, you need to understand something about her. This woman has a reputation. She's been on the board for years, not because she loves helping people, but because she loves rules. Rules are her personality. Rules are her hobby. She reads the CCNR like it's a romantic novel. If a blade of grass leans 1 degree too far left, she notices. If your trash can lid isn't fully closed, she takes photos. If your wind chimes are louder than a whisper, she sends you a paragraph about auditory pollution. And rumor has it, she despises anything non-suburban. People with gardens? She hates it. People with quirky decorations? She hates it. People with livestock? Oh, that's her Olympics. So when Steve said her name, everything suddenly clicked into place. Of course it was her. Of course it was the board's unofficial noise police. The funniest part? She lives 3 houses away. 3. As in, the bells would have to travel across a yard, through a row of trees, over a fence, and around her big decorative birdbath for her to even hear them, and that's on a loud day. But hey, when someone is committed to being annoyed, they will find a way. Later that afternoon, I ran into another neighbor, June, while checking my mail. She leaned in like she had insider intel and whispered. Word is, someone thinks your farm accessories are disrupting the suburban aesthetic. Farm accessories. Ma'am, they're bells. Tiny bells. Not a tractor. Not a rooster with a megaphone. Bells. By this point, the whole situation became kind of funny. I mean, I had gotten a sound complaint for the gentlest noise on earth. If the HOA ever heard the inside of a coffee shop at 7 a.m., they'd probably pass out. Still, I wasn't worried. I figured the email was a one-time thing, the HOA throwing a gentle warning into the void because someone needed to feel important that day. It wasn't even a direct accusation. It wasn't saying I caused the noise. It wasn't asking for any action. It was basically, we heard something. Maybe. Possibly. Kinda. Just, be sound mindful. So I shrugged it off and went on with my day. Fed the animals. Listened to the bells. Took a nap. Did not think about Linda even once. I honestly believe that was the end of it. A vague email. A sprinkle of neighbor gossip. A board member trying to control the universe. What's the worst that could happen, right? Right? Yeah. Turns out, that was just the warm-up act. Because while I was out there living my peaceful bell-jingling life, someone, and I'm not naming names, but it rhymes with Blinda, was preparing something bigger. Something pettier. Something that was about to drag this whole neighborhood into the weirdest sound war of all time. I thought it ended there. It didn't. Not even close. You ever open your mailbox expecting coupons or a boring water bill, but instead you find something that looks like it came straight from a lawyer's desk? Yeah. That was me on a Thursday afternoon. I walked out to the mailbox with zero suspicion. The sun was shining, the goats were doing their usual starving screams even though they just ate, and the bells were doing their gentle little jingles in the background. Honestly, it was a peaceful day. Then I pulled out a thick envelope with the HOA logo on it, you know, the logo that looks fancy but also looks like it was made by someone who has too many opinions about mailbox colors. The envelope was labeled Urgent Notice Action Required. Immediately, I knew. This wasn't good. This wasn't plant a tree for Earth Day. This wasn't remember to pressure wash your driveway. This was drama. I opened it right there, standing next to my fence like it was a breaking news announcement. Inside was a letter, not an email, not a reminder, not a courtesy note, a full-on cease and desist. Yep. A cease and desist, for bells. The letter said, and I quote, "Effective immediately, remove all livestock bells from your property. These items have been identified as nuisance devices and are in violation of community standards regarding peace, order, and neighborhood cohesion." Neighborhood cohesion. Because apparently my goats are out here ringing bells and tearing society apart. I kept reading, fully expecting to find a joke somewhere, but nope, they were serious. The letter went on. Failure to comply may result in fines, hearings, and further enforcement action. Over bells. Tiny bells. Tiny bells that sound like a sleepy fairy hitting a teacup. I actually laughed at first. I looked around like, is this a prank? Am I being filmed? I even checked the bushes for a hidden camera because honestly this felt like something out of a reality show. But nope. It was real. It had signatures. It had the official HOA letterhead. It even had bold text, that's how you know they mean business. I stood there, stunned. Not angry yet. Not confused. Just stunned. Because none of this made sense. Let me break down why. 1. The bylaws allow livestock. I'm not sneaking goats into a suburban cul-de-sac like criminals in the night. Livestock is literally allowed. It's printed in the rules. Printed. You can highlight it. 2. No noise measurements were taken. If you're gonna accuse me of a sound violation, at least bring one of those little decibel meters. Show up with a clipboard. Pretend to be scientific. Give me something. But no, they never came by. No tests. No data. Just vibes. 3. The bells are quieter than half the things this neighborhood uses daily. Lawnmowers? Way louder. Leaf blowers? Those things sound like jet engines. Garage doors? Honestly louder than my entire flock of animals put together. And don't even get me started on the guy who power washes his driveway every Sunday like he's trying to peel the earth apart. Meanwhile, my bells sound like, ding. Barely even that. So why was I getting a cease and desist? Because it wasn't about noise. It wasn't about the bells. It wasn't about peace, order, and neighborhood cohesion. It was about control. Plain and simple. The HOA, and specifically, one certain board member whose name I will not say but who absolutely rhymes with Blinda, needed to feel like they had a win. They needed to feel powerful. They needed to show that they could still flex their HOA authority muscles, even if it meant going after something as harmless as decorative bells on livestock. And the more I read the letter, the clearer it became. The language wasn't about sound levels. It wasn't about actual disturbance. It wasn't even about rules. It was about making me comply. Because that's what some HOAs do, they look for the smallest thing, twist the wording, and try to pressure you into obedience. But here's the thing. I'm not built for silent obedience. I'm built for minding my business, loving my animals, and living a peaceful life. But if someone tries to bully me with nonsense? Oh, I grow backbone real fast. I folded the letter, took a deep breath, and looked over at my animals. Pickles was chewing on a stick like it owed him money. Daisy was blinking softly at me. Princess Cluck was judging a butterfly again. Their bells jingled lightly in the breeze. Peaceful. Soft. Normal. Nothing about this was a nuisance. But the HOA wanted a battle? They were about to get one. Because this wasn't just about bells anymore. It was about the principle. It was about standing my ground. It was about not letting someone rewrite reality just because they hold a clipboard and a title. I walked back to the house with that letter in my hand, knowing one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The stakes had officially gone up. The HOA had escalated. And now, it was my turn. Walking into an HOA board meeting feels a lot like walking into a job interview you didn't apply for. You're already nervous, already suspicious, and somehow already guilty of something you didn't even know existed. That's exactly how I felt the night I decided to show up and challenge the cease and desist. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, you know, the room with bad fluorescent lighting, folding chairs, and a vibe that screams, "This is where joy comes to die." I walked in holding my copy of the letter, ready to talk calmly and reasonably, like a grown adult with common sense. I should have known better. The moment I stepped inside, I saw the whole board sitting up front behind a long table like judges on a reality show. The HOA president, Carl, sat in the middle. And yes, if you're wondering, he absolutely had the energy of a man who still brags about being the hall monitor in middle school. On his left was Treasurer Greg, who once sent a neighborhood-wide email about someone leaving unapproved mulch near a tree. On his right, Linda. Glasses low on her nose. Pen in hand. Staring at me like I had personally offended her ancestors. Great. Perfect. Fantastic audience. Carl opened the meeting with the usual announcements, budgets, landscaping updates, some nonsense about mailbox uniformity. Then he cleared his throat dramatically and said, "Next item on the agenda, noise complaint regarding livestock bells." Everyone in the room turned their heads toward me. Cool. Spotlight moment. Love that for me. Carl gestured. "You may speak." So I stood up, took a breath, and said, "I'd like to address the cease and desist I received. The bells on my animals are not loud. They're traditional, and the bylaws clearly allow livestock." Before I could finish, Greg jumped in. "They disrupt community peace," he said, shaking his head like he was disappointed in me. I blinked. "They're quieter than lawnmowers." Linda shot up straight. "This is not a farm. This is a neighborhood." "Oh, I'm aware," I said calmly. "But the bells only ring when the animals move. It's not constant. And they're not even loud enough to reach your property, Linda." She cut me off, tightening her lips. "That is not the point." Carl leaned forward with his hands folded like he was delivering a sermon. "We're trying to maintain harmony." Harmony. Such a pretty word. Too bad they were using it like a weapon. I stayed calm. If harmony is the goal, why hasn't anything been done about the leaf blowers that run every morning at 7? Or the neighbor who plays bass guitar on his porch? Those are louder than anything happening in my yard. Carl cleared his throat again. The man did more throat clearing than actual talking. This is different. How? I asked. Silence. Then Linda said it, because your setup gives the impression of a farm. And this community has standards. There it was. Not about noise. Not about rules. About impressions. About vibes. About her personal aesthetic preferences being treated like commandments. I tried again. I have supportive neighbors. Some of them are here tonight. A few people nodded behind me. One even said, "The bells don't bother us at all." But Carl waved his hand like he was shooing away a fly. We appreciate the input, but this is a board matter. Greg added, we already reviewed the situation thoroughly. Reviewed? Thoroughly? Nobody had even come by my property. No measurements were taken. Not a single conversation. They reviewed exactly nothing. I pulled out my notes, yes, I brought notes, and said, our town's noise ordinance sets the limit at 65 decibels. My bells barely hit 20. That's below normal human conversation. Again, Carl waved his hand. Decibels are not the only factor. There is also community impact. What impact? I asked. Crickets. Literal silence. But before I could keep going, Linda lifted her binder, a giant binder that I swear contains every complaint she's ever filed, and said loudly, the board has already reached a conclusion. Hold up. What? I frowned. You're voting before hearing all the facts? Carl nodded like this was totally normal. Correct. Greg moved straight into it. All in favor of upholding the ban on livestock bells? Linda's hand shot up instantly. Carl raised his right after. Greg raised his with a sigh, like the decision pained him but not enough to actually disagree. It took 3 seconds. 3 seconds to review. 3 seconds to vote. 3 seconds to decide the fate of my bells and apparently my entire way of living. Carl turned back to me. The board has voted to uphold the ban. You'll need to comply with the cease and desist. Just like that. Discussion over. Meeting over. Logic never even entered the room. I gathered my papers, nodded politely, and walked out. But inside? I was boiling. Because that wasn't a meeting. It wasn't even a debate. It was a setup. An ambush. And as I stepped into the cool night air, one thing became very, very clear. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. The morning after the meeting, I woke up with a whole new level of motivation. The kind of motivation you get when someone pushes you too far and suddenly you're ready to turn into a full-time detective, scientist, and investigative journalist all at once. If the HOA wanted to claim my bells were nuisance devices, then fine. I would give them data. Not opinions. Not vibes. Not whatever magical imagination Linda uses to hear bells 3 houses away. Actual evidence. So I launched what I now call Operation Measure the Noise. Step 1, get a decibel meter. I drove straight into town, walked into the hardware store, and picked up the most official-looking meter they had. The guy at the counter asked if I was measuring construction noise. I told him, no sir, I'm measuring goat accessories, and I swear he questioned every life choice that brought him to that moment. Back home, I felt like a scientist about to make a breakthrough. I clipped the decibel meter to my shirt and walked straight into the yard like, all right troops, time for research. The animals stared at me like I joined a reality show they weren't told about. I held up the meter and waited. Pickles the goat moved first. Ding! The meter flickered, 19 decibels. 19. You can literally whisper louder than that. If you breathe too hard, you beat that score. Then Daisy the mini cow took a step. Bink! The meter hit 21 decibels. Princess Cluck did her dramatic chicken strut with her glittery pink bell. Tick. 18 decibels. I wrote everything down like a proud scientist. Livestock bells, 18 to 21 dB. Step 2. Compare with actual neighborhood noises. I didn't even have to wait long. My next-door neighbor fired up his lawnmower like he was mowing the Amazon rainforest. I pointed my meter at it like a radar gun. 68 decibels. My face. Slightly smiling face. Then a couple kids rode past on bikes yelling about whose turn it was to race. Meter, 72 decibels. A dog barked down the road. Meter, 75 decibels. Somebody dropped a metal rake. 81 decibels. And then came the ultimate test. The weekend pool party. Every summer, the family 2 houses down hosts a pool party that's basically a mini music festival. They've got speakers, kids cannonballing, adults yelling about sunscreen, and at least one uncle who laughs like a dying engine. Meter readings during peak chaos? 84 decibels. Meanwhile, my bells, being innocent little angels, were sitting at 19. I even recorded videos standing at different distances, walking around the yard, letting the animals roam naturally. Every recording was clear, the bells were gentle, peaceful, and barely audible unless you were right next to them. Step 3. Get neighbor testimonials. I walked door to door, clipboard in hand, like the friendliest neighborhood salesman. Most neighbors laughed when I told them why I was collecting signatures. My favorite comment came from Mrs. Henderson, who said, "Honey, the only disturbance around here is that woman on the board who hates happiness." I didn't write that down word for word, but I wanted to. Another neighbor said the bells were soothing. Another said he didn't know the animals even had bells. Another said, "Tell the HOA to measure my teenagers' music if they want real noise." By noon, I had a whole list of signatures supporting me. Actual humans. Actual opinions. Something the board apparently doesn't believe in. Step 4. Compile everything. I spent the evening at my kitchen table like a college student cramming before finals. I had decibel averages, charts, screenshots, time-stamped videos, written neighbor statements, a comparison list. Livestock bells, 18 to 21 dB. Normal talking, 60 dB. Lawnmower, 65 to 75 dB. Leaf blower, 80 to 90 dB. Pool party uncle laugh, 84 dB, scientifically confirmed. The more I put together, the funnier the whole thing became. The HOA wasn't wrong by accident. They were wrong on purpose. They didn't care about noise, they cared about control, appearances, and enforcing whatever random vibe they believed the neighborhood should have. But now, I had facts. Receipts. Evidence so clear even Carl couldn't throat clear his way out of it. And as I organized everything into a nice, neat folder labeled HOA Counter-Strike package, I felt this wave of calm confidence wash over me. I wasn't just defending bells anymore. I was defending fairness. And honestly, I was about to enjoy it. Because if they wanted to play games, then fine. I could play too. But I was coming with proof. Operation Measure the Noise was complete. And now, it was time to strike back. A few days after completing Operation Measure the Noise, I woke up to the sound of something far more offensive than any livestock bell could ever hope to be, the metallic clank of my mailbox door. Inside was an envelope from the HOA. I opened it expecting the usual passive-aggressive newsletter about pet waste and seasonally appropriate door decor. Instead, I found a letter with a giant bold title. Notice of daily fines for non-compliance. The letter went on to explain, in the flowery, bureaucratic tone of someone who has never been hugged, that I was now being fined $50 per day until all livestock bells were removed. 50 per day. I stared at the paper like it had personally insulted my ancestors. I read it twice because I genuinely thought it had to be a prank. But no, this was the HOA's next brilliant move in their ongoing campaign against happiness. At the bottom of the letter, in a font size typically reserved for legal threats and the side effects of questionable medications, was this line: "Failure to comply may result in a lien against your property." A lien. Over goat bells. I sat down at my kitchen table, put my head in my hands, and laughed the kind of laugh you only produce when life has become so absurd you can't do anything else. I didn't remove the bells. Not because I was being dramatic. Because at this point, compliance was like handing your lunch money to the school bully. Once you do it, they'll never stop. The next morning, another letter arrived. Another fine. Same threatening tone, same warning about a lien. And the day after that. And the next. Each one stamped with that delightful HOA official correspondence logo that somehow manages to look smug. After the third letter, the neighborhood started buzzing. Not literally buzzing, though someone's weed trimmer was doing a great job proving the HOA's decibel hypocrisy, but buzzing in the social sense. People started whispering in driveways, asking questions, glancing toward my property as if expecting to see a SWAT team rappel down to confiscate barnyard accessories. Some neighbors were scared. "Don't poke the bear," one man said to me. "The board, they don't like being challenged." "The board?" I replied. "They're not the FBI. They're 4 retired adults and a guy who still wears Bluetooth headsets like it's 2007. He didn't laugh. Which made it even funnier. But others were angry, really angry. A woman from 2 streets over knocked on my door just to tell me she supported me. Apparently she had once planted sunflowers that were deemed unsightly. She'd been forced to remove them within 72 hours. Another neighbor told me the HOA once fined him because his trash can lid wasn't fully horizontal. The best part? None of these stories had ever made it into the official meeting minutes. Because, of course they didn't. Why document the petty stuff? The tension kept building, and so did the stack of letters. By the 5th fine, even the mailman gave me a sympathetic look. By the 7th, he just left it with a sigh, like he was dropping off divorce papers. And then came the moment I didn't expect. I was out by the fence checking on the animals when Mrs. Carter, my elderly neighbor who has lived here longer than the HOA itself, walked over. She's one of those women who carries herself with the serene authority of someone who survived raising 6 kids and therefore fears absolutely nothing anymore. She leaned on the fence, glanced around the yard, then looked me in the eye. "They're coming after you now, huh?" she said. "Apparently. At this point I'm expecting them to show up with bolt cutters." She nodded slowly. "They've been getting away with this for years." I blinked. "This? As in, harassing residents?" "Oh yes," she said, adjusting her sun hat like she was about to deliver classified intel. "They fined a couple last year because their curtains were too brightly colored. They fined a man for having a garden gnome. They fined me because my porch light bulb was the wrong warmth." Warmth. Can you imagine that? I actually couldn't. She lowered her voice. "You might be the one who finally pushes back." That sentence hit me harder than the fines. Because she wasn't joking. She wasn't being dramatic. She genuinely meant it. And hearing her say it made everything shift. This wasn't just about goat bells anymore. This was about a pattern. A problem bigger than my little herd. I looked back at the pile of fine notices, then at the folder of evidence sitting on my table inside. The HOA wanted a fight. And they were about to get one. Because if they thought daily fines and lien threats were going to scare me into submission, they clearly didn't understand the level of stubbornness required to own a goat named Pickles. I walked into that appeal hearing like a student who actually did the homework and printed it in color. The board had no idea what was coming. The room smelled like burnt coffee and frustration, classic HOA energy. A few neighbors showed up to support me, mostly because they were tired of the board picking random battles every other week. One guy still had grass clippings on his shoes. He came straight from mowing, which was hilarious considering they claimed my tiny bells were a problem. I set my binder on the table. It made a nice thunk, which honestly was louder than the livestock bells themselves, but I didn't say that out loud. Yet. Okay, the board president said, adjusting his glasses like he was about to cross-examine me in court. You requested this hearing. Please explain why. I tried to keep my voice calm, even friendly. Well, you said the bells are a nuisance. So I did what any reasonable person does when accused of running a miniature cow symphony at sunrise. I measured the noise. A couple neighbors snorted. The president did not. I pulled out my first page, a chart with decibel readings. Here's the thing, I said. My goat's bells average around 38 decibels. For reference, that's quieter than a normal conversation. Quieter than a dishwasher. Quieter than the HOA lawn crew at 7 a.m., which, by the way, hits about 72 decibels. I flipped the page like I was hosting a game show. Here's a comparison of a barking dog, kids playing in the cul-de-sac, and a pool party. I pointed to the peaks on the chart. All louder than my animals casually walking around minding their business. The treasurer leaned forward, squinting like maybe the numbers would magically rearrange themselves if he stared hard enough. The secretary whispered something to the vice president, who immediately looked annoyed. Classic. The president interrupted me. These measurements, how accurate are they? I held up the decibel meter like it was a sacred relic. Pretty accurate. I bought a legit one. Not a toy. And I recorded everything. I tapped the tablet on the table. Here are video clips showing the bells versus normal neighborhood sounds. If you want, I can play the one where a leaf blower drowns out everything within a 50-foot radius. A couple neighbors nodded enthusiastically. The board, not so much. The treasurer cleared his throat. Well, even if the bells are technically within acceptable limits, they feel loud. I raised an eyebrow. They feel loud? He nodded. Yes. I put my pen down. Sir, feelings aren't decibels. A quiet laugh rolled through the room. That's when the president stepped in again, trying to regain control. We have to maintain community harmony. These bells, they create an atmosphere that isn't aligned with the neighborhood aesthetic. I blinked at him. The bylaws allow livestock. And livestock make sounds. That's part of their aesthetic. He clenched his jaw just enough for me to know he wanted to say something he shouldn't. Instead, he flipped through my paperwork like he was searching for a typo that would magically end my case. This is extensive, he muttered, clearly surprised that I came prepared. One of my neighbors, the elderly woman who basically became my unofficial coach through this whole thing, raised her hand from the back of the room. I've lived here for 22 years, she said. Those bells are the least annoying thing in this entire subdivision. Can we maybe focus on the real problems? Like the pothole on Maple Drive that's big enough to swallow a small car? Someone clapped. The board president immediately asked for order. I continued. Look, I'm not trying to start a war. I just want to keep doing what I've always done. My animals aren't loud. They're not harming anyone. And half the neighborhood didn't know the bells existed until you sent the cease and desist. The president's eye twitched. We will review this evidence, he said. And deliver our decision in writing. Translation, they needed time to figure out how to justify a rule that made no sense. I could see it on their faces, the scrambling, the whispering, the frustration. They weren't expecting data. They weren't expecting video proof, neighbor support, or charts that made their argument collapse like a soggy cardboard box in the rain. This wasn't about noise. It wasn't about harmony. It wasn't about bells at all. It was about the board president being personally offended that someone dared challenge his authority. And now that I'd slapped down undeniable evidence, he didn't know what to do next. I gathered my binder, nodded to the room, and walked out feeling more confident than ever. Because for the first time since this whole mess started, I could tell the HOA was rattled. And that meant the real fight was just beginning. A few days after the appeal hearing, I woke up thinking maybe, just maybe, the HOA was taking time to reflect, reconsider, maybe even touch a little grass. You know, act normal for once. Yeah. No. That fantasy died the second I pulled into my driveway after running errands and spotted something weird on my porch, a bright yellow notice taped to the door like a neon slap in the face. I walked closer, squinting. Property inspection access attempted. Attempted? Bro, what? I hadn't scheduled anything. Nobody called me. Nobody emailed. They just showed up like surprise party guests, except without the cake, balloons, or basic human courtesy. Inside the envelope were printed time-stamped photos. They'd taken pictures of my animals, the bells, the yard, basically everything except my soul. And honestly, I'm not convinced they didn't try. One picture had my goat staring straight into the camera like she was posing for a mugshot. Another shot captured the bells hanging from the animals' collars, zoomed in dramatically, like the HOA thought they uncovered a criminal operation. The note attached said, "This visit was necessary to document continuing violations affecting neighborhood aesthetics." I sat on my steps and just laughed. Not even angry laughter. Pure disbelief. Since when were tiny brass bells destroying the community's aesthetic? Did the president wake up one morning and decide he hated joy? Did a bell personally offend him? But it got better, oh, much better. At the bottom of the packet was a list of new fines. The first one: improper storage of feed bins, $50 per day. I stared at it. The bins were literally behind a gate, neatly stacked, closed, and honestly cleaner than most people's garages. But apparently, feed bins are now a threat to society. Fine number 2. Fence requires repainting, $150. Repainting? Bro, my fence was fine. Was it brand new? No. But was it peeling or collapsing? Also no. It looked like a normal fence living its best life out in the sun. Fine number 3, and this one made me laugh out loud. Livestock bells creating visual clutter. Visual clutter. I didn't even know bells could be clutter. Did they want my animals to wear tiny tuxedos instead? Should I have hung minimalist decor pieces around their necks? Modern art cow pendants? It was so ridiculous that the only reasonable reaction was to sit down on my porch and stare at the sky for a full minute. After I calmed down, I called a couple neighbors. Turns out they'd seen 2 HOA board members walking around earlier, clipboards out, taking their little detective photos. One neighbor said they were acting like they were gathering evidence for a crime documentary. I thought they were going to start dusting for fingerprints. Another said, "Yeah, they tried to peep into your goat shed but your big goat scared them off." It was honestly the funniest thing I've seen all week. Good goat. 10 out of 10. No notes. It became obvious what was happening. This wasn't about bells. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was retaliation. Straight up pushback because I dared to present actual facts at the appeal hearing. They couldn't win with logic, so they tried intimidation. Fines stacked like they were being printed on a conveyor belt. Every little thing suddenly became an issue. They wanted to stress me out. Wear me down. Make me so tired that I'd eventually cave and take the bells off. And honestly, that almost made me more stubborn. I mean, who wakes up and chooses chaos like this? Who looks at a peaceful yard with happy little animals and says, "Yes, this is the hill I'm going to die on"? The HOA board, apparently. I sat there on the porch with the packet in my hands, the sun dropping behind the trees, and my animals shuffling around the yard behind me. Their bells jingled softly, almost like encouragement. Or maybe that was just me being dramatic. Hard to tell. But the message was clear. They weren't done fighting. And lucky for them, neither was I. Because if they wanted a war over some bells, some feed bins, and a perfectly normal fence, then that's exactly what they were going to get. And trust me, they had no idea what was coming next. After the surprise inspection drama, I expected the neighborhood to go quiet, people avoiding eye contact, pretending they didn't see the HOA creeping around my yard with clipboards like confused mall cops. But the opposite happened. The next morning, I opened my front door and found a casserole. Just sitting there. Still warm. No note, no explanation. Just a mysterious dish of comfort carbs. I stood there for a second like, wow. This is either support, or someone thinks I'm too stressed to cook now. Turns out, it was support. About an hour later, Mrs. Sanders from 2 houses down came over holding a Tupperware full of banana bread. I heard what they did, she said, handing it to me like we were in some kind of resistance movement. Nobody likes the way that board treats people. You let me know the next meeting, I'll be there. I thanked her, then I cut a slice of banana bread the size of a brick because, honestly, stress makes you hungry. But she wasn't the only one. By noon, 3 more neighbors had stopped by. One brought homemade cookies. Another dropped off sweet tea. Someone even brought goat treats, which instantly made them my animal's new favorite human. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like a small-town uprising. And honestly, I loved it. People started telling me their own HOA horror stories, one's way worse than Belle's. One neighbor got fined because the shade of beige on her house wasn't the right beige. Another got written up for holiday decor inconsistency because her pumpkins weren't arranged symmetrically. A guy down the street told me the board once made him resod his entire lawn because they didn't like the pattern of grass growth. I didn't even know grass had patterns. Every story I heard made the whole Belle's situation look more and more ridiculous. It was like the board collected drama the way people collect stamps. A few neighbors offered to attend the next meeting with me. We're tired of this nonsense, one said. They only get away with stuff because nobody pushes back. Another added, you're doing what all of us wish we had the nerve to do. The support honestly lifted half the weight off my shoulders. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. And the HOA? Oh, they were definitely not expecting that. Then came the biggest revelation of all. One neighbor, I'll call him Mike because that's his name, and he said came over looking like he was carrying state secrets. You got a minute? He asked. I nodded, thinking he was going to warn me about another random fine or maybe tell me my goat had wandered into someone's yard again. But no. He walks closer and whispers, listen, the HOA president? She hates anything rural. Like, hates it. I blinked. What do you mean? This is literally a semi-rural neighborhood. That's the funny part, he said. She moved here to escape the countryside. Said it reminds her of the place she grew up, and she doesn't want to live like that anymore. She's been trying to make the whole neighborhood look more suburban for years. I just stared at him. A full 3 seconds of silence. So she wants to escape the countryside by moving to a place that has livestock in the bylaws? He nodded. Yep. And she's been trying to push anything countryish out. Chickens, gardens, decorative wagon wheels, everything. You just happen to be her latest target. I laughed because the logic was so backwards it hurt. This whole battle wasn't about bells or noise or aesthetics, it was someone trying to rewrite the vibe of an entire neighborhood based on personal preference. Which made me even more determined to stand my ground. That night, I sat on my porch again, listening to the soft gingling of the bells while the sun dipped behind the trees. My animals wandered around peacefully, completely unaware they were part of a neighborhood uprising. For the first time since the whole saga began, I didn't feel stressed. I felt powerful. Supported. Ready. Because now, it wasn't just me against the HOA. It was me and half the neighborhood. And the more stories people shared, the more fired up everyone became. This wasn't just about bells anymore, it was about every ridiculous rule, every sneaky fine, every petty power trip the board had ever pulled. The HOA had tried to isolate me. But instead, they accidentally created a community. A loud, supportive, casserole-delivering community. And that was their biggest mistake yet. By the time I got home that evening, my brain was buzzing with ideas, mostly because the HOA had officially crossed into absurdity, and mostly because I was still humming from the support of my neighbors. But I knew I couldn't just show up at the next meeting and wing it. No. If I was going to fight back, I needed rules, strategy, and a little flair. So I started digging through the HOA documents again. Yes, the same documents that had caused me about 40 migraines in the past 2 months. And then, buried in the middle of some dry legal language about landscaping compliance and mailbox heights, I found it. A shining beacon of hope. Traditional functional livestock equipment is exempt from noise restrictions. I blinked at the page. Read it twice. And then laughed out loud, startling Pickles, who stopped chewing on his stick to glare at me. Exempt. Exempt meant the bells weren't just allowed, they were untouchable. My little jinglers had legal immunity. The HOA had literally written the loophole into their own rulebook. It felt like winning a game you didn't even know you were playing. That night, I drafted Operation Loud but Legal. The goal: make the bells noticeable, unavoidable, and glorious, but still fully compliant with the rules. Step 1: upgrade the bells. I called a local craftsman who specialized in brass instruments. Yes, there's a person for everything. I explained the mission: bells that would clang with authority, still be functional for livestock, and remain under decibel limits. He laughed, then asked if I wanted them engraved. I said, absolutely. Engrave victory on them. Step 2: polish them. Shiny bells catch the eye and the imagination. If the HOA wanted a visual attack, they'd get a visual spectacle instead. The polished brass reflected the sunrise perfectly, like tiny golden suns hanging around the necks of my animals. Step 3: professional fitting. I didn't want a scenario where a bell slipped, banged against a fence, or annoyed my own animals. So I had them carefully fitted by someone who treats goat collars like fine jewelry. The result? Bells that jangled, jingled, and sang the song of lawful defiance every time my livestock moved. Step 4: test, measure, repeat. I wanted to be absolutely sure I stayed under the legal noise limit. The decibel meter came back into play. I had Daisy strut across the yard. Pickles take a dramatic step. Princess Cluck strut like she was auditioning for a Broadway musical. Every sound was measured. Every bell certified. All readings compliant. The HOA couldn't argue decibels, they couldn't even argue function. By the end of the day, my backyard looked like a ceremonial parade was about to begin. The animals wore their new bells proudly, and I could almost imagine the HOA president waking up to the soft yet undeniable metallic chime echoing through the neighborhood. I paused to admire my work. It was perfect. Strategic. Legal. Beautifully rebellious. Then I started drafting my next steps. The grand reveal wouldn't be subtle. This wasn't about tiptoeing around the rules. It was about making a statement loud, lawful, and impossible to ignore. I called it the Jingle Manifesto. The plan: let the bells ring in full glory, make every neighbor notice, and do it fully within the law. The HOA could no longer claim nuisance or aesthetic disruption, they would have zero legal ground to stand on. I even drafted a little voiceover script in my head. They tried to silence us, but we're allowed. And now, we'll let the bells speak. By the end of the evening, I felt a sense of calm satisfaction. Months of fines, inspections, and petty threats had led to this moment. I had turned the HOA's own rules into my weapon, my shield, and my stage. All that remained was the execution. The next morning, I looked out at my backyard, gleaming with new brass and ready livestock, and smiled. This wasn't just a comeback. This was a statement. A legal, shiny, bell-ringing, unstoppable statement. And the HOA had no idea what was about to hit them. The night before the big reveal, I barely slept. Not from nerves, but from excitement. Months of petty fines, surprise inspections, and HOA threats had led to this single, glorious morning. This was the culmination of Operation Loud but Legal. The moment where bells, brass, and law converged into poetic justice. I woke up at 5 a.m., still dark outside. The air smelled crisp, carrying that soft hint of dew across the yard. Perfect. The animals were already awake, probably wondering why I kept muttering phrases like, "Tomorrow, justice will ring." Pickles gave me a suspicious side eye, as if to say, "You better not mess this up." I quickly set up the yard. Neighbors were already trickling in, some holding coffee, others still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Everyone knew something big was about to happen, but nobody knew the full glory of it. The anticipation was electric. Then the animals trotted out. One by one, they stepped into the soft morning light. Daisy the mini cow led the parade, followed by Pickles and Princess Cluck strutting with unmistakable pride. And hanging from their collars? The new handcrafted, polished brass bells, gleaming like tiny golden trophies. I held my breath. And then they moved. The bells rang. Rich. Resonant. Clear. Absolutely, undeniably audible, but still completely within legal decibel limits. I couldn't help grinning. It was perfect. Not obnoxious, not chaotic, just a melodic, cheerful chorus that reminded everyone this was lawful, traditional livestock equipment. Every jingle felt like a tiny hammer striking at the ridiculousness of the fines, inspections, and secret inspections. From across the street, I saw the HOA president step out of her house. Linda. Glasses perched low on her nose, jaw tight, eyes narrowing as the first notes of brass bells cut through the morning air. She walked toward the parade like a storm cloud, arms crossed, trying to contain her fury. But there was no containing this. Every bell that rang in sync with an animal's trot was a reminder she had been wrong. The rule was on my side. The law was on my side. And now, the sound? Undeniable. I walked calmly to meet her halfway, holding a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. I extended it like a gift. I think you'll find this part interesting, I said softly. Traditional functional livestock equipment is exempt from noise restrictions. It's literally in your own rules. She snatched it from me like it was a hot potato, scanning the words with her glasses sliding down her nose. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, rage, disbelief. I swear her throat cleared a dozen times, but she never found words that actually mattered. Meanwhile, neighbors were filming everything. Phones out, capturing every note of brass, every hoofstep, every faint cluck. Cheers erupted as the bells rang louder, legally, proudly, with my animals trotting around like miniature royalty. One neighbor shouted, "You told us the HOA couldn't stop you. This is amazing." Another waved wildly. "This is the best sunrise we've ever had." The president turned back toward the board members who had now appeared in the driveway, mouths open, clearly unsure if they should intervene or faint on the spot. None of them moved. Their authority? Null. Their power? Gone. And my backyard? A symphony of victory. I took a deep breath and let the moment sink in. Every little fine, every whispering neighbor, every stupid inspection led to this crescendo. The bells weren't just ringing, they were singing justice. Linda stormed back toward her house, clutching the rulebook like a shield, muttering under her breath. I think she said something about decorum and auditory chaos, but honestly, it was drowned out by the harmonious chimes. I turned to my neighbors, feeling a mix of triumph and gratitude. "This is just the beginning," I said. "No more fines, no more surprise inspections. The rules are on our side, and today, the bells proved it." Pickles nudged my hand, Daisy blinked serenely, Princess Cluck strutted as if accepting applause. The neighbors cheered louder. Phones continued filming, capturing the moment that would surely go down as the neighborhood's legendary victory over petty HOA tyranny. And me? I just stood there, smiling, letting the bells ring, letting the sunrise glow over our little rebellion, knowing that the sound, rich, legal, undeniable, would echo for a long time. Because some battles are worth waking up early for. Some victories sound like brass, hung proudly on livestock collars. And some rules are meant to be read carefully. The HOA thought they could silence us. Instead, we made them listen. After the bell-ringing showdown, I expected things to calm down. Maybe a week or two of awkward glances from the HOA president. Maybe some passive-aggressive newsletter updates. That would have been fine. But no. What followed was something far sweeter: total, undeniable fallout. Word spread fast. By the next morning, neighbors were walking their dogs past my yard, giving me knowing smiles and thumbs up as the bells jingled proudly. The story? The HOA had tried to ban something explicitly allowed in the rules. It was like discovering the villain in a superhero movie forgot to check their own powers. Emails circulated, text chains buzzed, and suddenly I wasn't just a resident with noisy livestock, I was the hero of the neighborhood. People were quoting the exemption clause like it was scripture. Some neighbors even joked about making t-shirts, functional livestock equipment, legal since always. Meanwhile, the board was scrambling. Internal meetings were held behind closed doors, or so I assume, because they started speaking in even more bureaucratic, confused, and very defensive tones whenever anyone saw them outside. They were forced to revise the noise policy, clarifying exactly what was legal and what wasn't. Basically, the rulebook now explicitly protected livestock bells, which meant my herd had officially HOA clearance. And the fines? Oh, the fines. Every last one of them, freshly printed and ironically stamped, was refunded. Cash, check, or electronic transfer, I don't care how they did it. I had my money back. That alone felt like a victory parade. I may have done a small victory dance in the kitchen, goat approved. But the best part? The board's embarrassment spilled over into the rest of the neighborhood. People who had quietly suffered through years of petty fines, aesthetic audits, and mysterious inspections suddenly found their voices. Residents started speaking up in meetings, asking for transparency, questioning new policies, and dare I say it, laughing openly at outdated rules. The social power had shifted. The HOA president herself? She faced a reality check the size of a small barn. The community had witnessed her overreach firsthand, and let's just say, her reputation took a hit. At the next election, she lost re-election to a newcomer who promised to focus on actual community needs instead of policing curtains and garden gnomes. Watching her go was oddly satisfying, the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing justice isn't just served, it's documented and shared on social media. Meanwhile, I got a lot of unexpected perks. I was invited to neighborhood barbecues as a guest of honor. People shared stories about their own petty fines, laughing and nodding like we were part of some secret club. Kids waved at the goats during walks, commenting on their new, shiny brass bells. Even some of the formerly quiet neighbors started dropping by just to ask questions about the legal bell strategy. And the bells themselves? They became a symbol of stubbornness, cleverness, and community pride. Every morning, the soft chimes echoed across the yards, reminding everyone, including the former president, now on her way out, that rules exist for a reason, and trying to bend them for personal preference rarely works. Reflecting on it all, I realized this saga had accomplished more than I expected. It wasn't just about my animals, my bells, or my sanity. It was about standing up to arbitrary authority, about making your voice heard, and about turning tiny acts of defiance into community empowerment. Sometimes, it takes a little brass, a few clever measurements, and a lot of stubbornness to remind people of their rights. And sometimes, the sound of victory is literally a herd of livestock jingling at sunrise. So yeah, the HOA tried to silence me. They tried to fine me. They tried to intimidate me. And they lost. Not just me, the whole neighborhood won. Because when people see rules being abused, they push back. When voices are joined together, petty boards crumble. And when goats wear shiny brass bells, justice sounds a lot better than any HOA newsletter ever could. Pickles, Daisy, and Princess Cluck? They're still jingling every morning. And honestly, I think they know they're not just animals anymore, they're legends. The HOA learned a lesson. The neighborhood learned a lesson. I learned a lesson. And the bells? Well, the bells are still ringing.